PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. In this game, from a very standard opening, a French defence, we're going to see a novelty on move 6, which I predict we're going to see in tournaments and chess clubs very soon all over the world. So this is the game Nodirbek Abdusattorov against Leon Mendonca, round 2 of the Tata Steel Masters. So both players prodigies. Abdusattorov, 20 years old. Well, he won the World Rapid Play Championship at the age of 17. I mean, that was unbelievable. Leon Mendonca, he's just 18 years old, from India. And last year, he won the Challengers tournament in Vaikanze. So fully deserves to be here, even though his rating is much lower than a lot of others in the Tata Steel Masters. Still, fully deserves his place, having won the Challengers. So let's crack on with this one. E4 from Abdusattorov. I should also mention Abdusattorov, number 6 in the world. I mean, he is a real prospect for the very top in future years. So it's a French defence, and Abdusattorov goes for the advanced variation. In fact, they played this exact line in the Qatar Open just a couple of months ago. And after Queen b6, Abdusattorov went for g3 and bishop h3, which is pretty unusual. In today's game, we saw a4. Now, that is very strange. If you look through the databases, it has been played before, but by no one notable. When you first look at this, you think, is this a finger failer? Did White mean to play a3, which is the standard move? I mean, a4 looks very funny. After the game, Abdusattorov revealed that this was an opening idea of his coach, Rustam Kazimjanov, fellow Uzbek, of course. So what's the big idea? Well, basically to put the bishop on b5, but there's a little bit more to it, which is unusual strategy in itself. But there's more to it than that, because sometimes you can throw in this little poke, a5. Incidentally, I'm not sure about the move Queen b6. Personally, I think this is inaccurate, not because of a4, although this might prove it to a certain extent. I prefer the move order bishop d7. That's the line that I recommend in my Anti-Sicilians book and course as well, because I feel that it's best not to commit the queen too early on, whereas the bishop, we can be pretty certain that that's where it belongs on d7. But anyway, that's another story. So Queen b6, a4. So a remarkable move. And Mendonca already had a first little think, 9.5 minutes over exchanging. And then another think, 7 minutes over knight h6. Now that's quite a committal move. You don't have to play like that, of course. I mean, I wonder just about occupying the b4 square with the bishop. Could just go bishop d7 as well. But anyway, knight h6. And now bishop b5. So I find this quite curious. Normally, we want to keep our light squared bishop on this wonderful diagonal. But this is more about securing this pawn. Basically, after the bishop exchanges here, then White will have no difficulties with the pawn on d4. It still feels a little bit anti-positional to me to potentially give up that light squared bishop. But anyway, knight f5. So you can see there's no real pressure here, of course, because of the pin. And knight c3. Well, it's nice to have that square for the knight. Bishop d7 and castles. Well, in fact, he hasn't taken on c6. So it is possible for black to actually take this pawn. But let's have a look what would happen. So this is a kind of Milner-Barry gambit. Of course, White manages to displace the king. And now key move Queen f3. So the idea is simply to play rook d1 and then knight d5 to get through to the king. And this is already a very unpleasant position for black to defend. So wisely, after a 21-minute think, a6 played by Mendonca. So Abdusattorov exchanges and bishop takes c6. Okay, looks okay so far. And this is a nice move, knight e2. So you can see there is absolutely no difficulty for white with the pawn on d4, solidly protected. This knight wasn't doing too much on c3, so what it does, it swings round to the king side via one of these squares and potentially can land on this beautiful h5 square, looking at the pawn on g7, and if that moves, the knight comes into f6. Bishop e7 played. Again, I like bishop b4 here. That feels like a decent square. Even if the dark square bishops will be exchanged off, well, I think it's important for black to have control of this square. Bishop e7 played. And now b3. So you can see that instead of pushing on, which would allow the bishop into b5, then b3 played. So that's solid pawns. Means this bishop just doesn't have scope. So that is truly a bad bishop. And another reason why b3 was played, it gives white the option to play bishop e3, exchanging off these bishops, which emphasizes the bad French bishop on c6 and also weakens the dark squares. But it's only a possibility at the moment. You're not committed to that. Well, here is where Mendonca really makes a very committal move, and I would say a questionable move. He castles queenside. Wow, that is really, so we're going to see, a very brave move. Okay, so what about the normal move? Castles kingside. That's the move I would like to play as black. But I have a feeling that he was put off by this move g4. So if the knight goes back to h6, well, obviously that can be exchanged off by the bishop and that damages the structure and that doesn't look nice. Okay, so what about knight h4? Well, then white will exchange and play g5, so that bishop is trapped for the moment. So that's obviously an issue that black needs to deal with. So f6, an exchange. Now that opens up both kings, but white has immediate access to the king side with the queen. Queen g4 check threatened, and after this, well, I think black is in some trouble. So if bishop g5 in exchange, and then knight h5, that's why this knight was spun round to the king side. Look, it's looking at f6, it controls f4. Obviously a very, very good position for white. Compare the two queens. Black's queen is in Siberia and all the action is happening over on the king side. So that's why I think Mendonca was reluctant to castle kingside. I mean, he could have waited maybe with rook c8, but castles queenside is very committal. Because now Abdusattorov starts to control some squares here and it's time to push the pawns. Mendonca played king b8. Funnily enough, king d7 is Stockfish 17's suggestion. Running back into the middle is a really funny move. I mean, very unlikely to be played having castle queenside, but just interesting that that's Stockfish's suggestion. I mean, so it doesn't solve all black's problems. Anyway, king b8 and b4, and this is a gift for white, pushing the pawns to open up lines on the queen side in front of the king. If bishop takes, then this loses material. Simple pin. Okay, so rook c8, rook b1, supporting the pawn, bishop d7, b5 of course, and here Mendonca took on b5. Now I'm really very surprised that he played that. I mean, I think this should be played Now, positionally, it's not good. You know, this bishop is locked in. This pawn is vulnerable. I think in the long term, basically white will switch over to start to attack on the king side. But I think black should try that and try to hold out. But taking, well, that is very, very brave, it has to be said. Now, rook c4 was played here. Of course, it's a nice square for the rook, but queen b3. And white has a very simple plan, and that's to play rook b2 and then switch, so that maintains the protection of this pawn with these pieces, and then switching that rook on f1 to a1, and you can see the attack starts on the a file. Moves like, once the rook is on a1, then bishop a5, pushing the queen away. It's such a strong attack and very hard to meet. So that's why Mendonca decided, right, I'm just going to stir things up on the king side. And it's possible to take this pawn straight away, although it starts to get a little bit complicated. But h3, a very cool move from Abdusattorov. It could be that he's going to push with g4. So, for example, after rook g8, g4 is possible. And again, just rook b2 and rook a1. And the king side is closed for long enough. Or in the game after h5, now he took this. So this is the game continuation. Now, if bishop takes, knight takes, then the knight is even more secure than the other variation, and it's useful for white to have h3, which just gives the king a flight square here. Rook b4 played, attacking the queen, which dropped back to a2. Rook takes b5. Okay, Mendonca has won this pawn, but it's not a big deal. Actually, this is a really nice move. Maybe this should be a moment when we're going to stop. Okay, so it's white to move. So how would you play with white in this position? So there you go. I'll have a drink. You have a think. White play. What was Abdusattorov's next move? Cheers. Well, it's possible to exchange here. Positionally, it must be good to exchange these dark squared bishops. The dark squares are weaker, and then you could switch to the a file, rook a1. But this move is even stronger. Knight g3, excellent move. If knight takes knight, you don't recapture, you take the bishop. And that is absolutely crushing. Of course, king c8, queen a8 mate. So bishop takes g5, and then you take this knight. You don't take this bishop yet. This knight is about to land on d6. So pawn takes, and now knight takes g5. So with that little transaction, this has ensured that black is positionally absolutely busted. So you can see, well, that's not a picture. That's not a pleasant picture. Terrible pawns. A marauding knight, and black's king is in trouble. Basically, it all adds up to a crushing position for white. And, yeah, one more thing. Black's rooks are split. Whoops, black's rooks are split. Which doesn't help the situation. White's piece is beautifully coordinated. Well, Mendonca decides, in for a penny, in for a pound. I may as well grab a pawn for my trouble. But then the rook switches across. Be careful. Queen a8 threatened. King c7. Knight takes pawn. So the knight is about to spin round to somewhere even stronger. Rook threatened. Rook g8 and knight d6. What a dream. White even has an octopus knight. So some of my favourite themes all combined in this game. I mean, this is just a rout, actually. A positional rout. Beautiful piece. That just causes so many problems for black's major pieces. Rook attacked. Rook b4, queen a5 check. The queen came back to block and queen takes d5. So the rook is threatened. Moved. Now there are several winning moves. Abdusattorov chose knight c4 and Mendonca resigned. Why? Well, the queen is attacked. So if the queen moves, let's say to c6, queen a5 check, picks off the rook. If queen c6, queen b5, then we've got queen d6 and rook a8 mate. I think I'm just going to leave it in that position. You can see that black, well, that's a nice checkmating position, but black is completely bust. So there we go. Let's go back to this move a4. So as I mentioned earlier, this was, well, Abdusattorov after the game in the interview said that this is an idea of his coach Rustam Kazimjanov. And it's tricky. So there are tactical ideas with potentially a5 and then taking here and, you know, some kind of b4. But actually, it's a very strategic move. He's looking to play bishop b5, take the pressure off this pawn, and then try to exchange dark square bishops and get a positional advantage. Very interesting move. Watch out if you're a French player. However, my recommendation is bishop d7. Avoids all that stuff. So after 2 rounds, we have a bunch up at the top. There are in fact 5 players on 1.5. Pragyanananda, Abdusattorov, Gukesh, Caruana and Kayma, all on 1.5. Do join me for my round 3 report tomorrow. Thanks for watching.